People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Sportsmen and women must have the right and freedom to practice their sport in an ecosystem where there is a culture of safety, dignity, and a community that does not tolerate sexual harassment or misconduct of any sort. Tonight's topic of discussion is safety in sport. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Shyamala Gomez, human rights activist and lawyer, also the executive director of the Center for Equality and Justice. Good evening and welcome, Shyamala. I'm also joined by Jayanthi, Kuru, Utumpala, women's rights activist. Good evening and welcome back, Jayanthi.
Thank you, Sonali.
Joining us for the first time, Niloo Jayathilake, Vice President of the National Olympic Committee, Sri Lanka, also the Chairperson of the Gender Equity Committee of the National Olympic Committee. Welcome to the show, Niloo.
Thank you.
My first question is to Niloo. Niloo, since 2019, Sri Lanka has had what is called the Safe Sports Policy. Take us through what this entails.
National Olympic Committee of Sri Lanka, taking the flow from the International Olympic Committee to bring in gender equality and giving opportunity to women sports people. They have come up with a consensus statement to include women and give equal participation in the Olympic Games. So flowing from the Olympic Games, that we at National Olympic Committee is the custodian for the Olympic Games representation, is that we brought in the Safe Sports Policy, keeping in line of bringing equal participation for Olympic Games. In 2024 would be the first time the Games would have 50-50 participation of both genders, male and female. So to run up to the Paris Olympic Games, we had to work our framework of really bringing that gender equality in sports in Sri Lanka. So our committee, the Gender Equity Committee at that time, came up with the policy framework to develop sexual harassment and abuse policy in the country for sports for the first time. And I'm happy to say that in 2020 that it was reworded as Safe Sports Policy for sports people in the country.
Jayanthi, when we speak about what is entailed in harassment, oftentimes we ourselves don't realize that certain behaviors can fall within the definition of harassment because certain toxic behaviors have been so normalized in Sri Lanka especially. Speak to us about what the definition of harassment entails.
So harassment basically stems primarily from power dynamics, unequal power dynamics. And according to the Safe Sports Policy, the definition of harassment is quite broad to include all forms of sexual harassment and abuse, including sexual abuse, sexual harassment, physical harassment, verbal harassment, gestural. And I'll give you some examples. Now, when we say physical harassment, it also could mean just unwanted touching, accidentally, but not so accidentally, touching in inappropriate ways. If it's verbal, it could also mean just the kinds of words that are used against someone. And someone could think this person is upset with me, therefore, my coach is upset, so he used that kind of language, but that can also be harassment. If you are using derogatory language, abusive language, that's harassment too. Sometimes we use the word catcalling. People say that, oh, it's just, sexist jokes. Sexist jokes can also be harassment. Gestural could mean, again, using your body language, using your fingers, your hands in terms of showing gestures or with your hands and implying that there's also harassment there. So there's quite a range, and the good thing is that the policy outlines each of these in detail because it has also been adopted from the ILO and Employees Federation, the EFC. They had the workplace sexual harassment at the workplace, and that was adopted into the Safe Sports Policy. So the examples also included in the policy, which can help anyone trying to understand exactly what this is. So just to give you some examples, even sending unwanted text messages, visuals on WhatsApp, that is also a form of visual harassment. whistling, making suggestive sounds, using obscene language, those are all verbal harassment. Gestural could also mean staring, leering, ogling, making sexually explicit hand or finger movements, so there's quite a range here, which is good because it's quite broad. And I think what's important is for people to understand, particularly athletes, that if there's something that you have experienced that just does not feel right, because all of us have a right to live free from violence and harassment, and you feel there's something not quite right here, don't discount it and stay silent, because very often, particularly as women, we say, no, that's normal, just that touch, it's just a touch. But no, speak out about it.
Thank you for that, Jayanthi. A cursory reading of the Safe Sport policy shows that it's quite comprehensive. Shyamala, I'd like to come to you. A policy is only as good as its implementation. Take us through how the law enforcement agencies come in to this equation.
Yeah, Sonali, I think something that we need to kind of keep in mind is the fact that even the Safe Sports policy does not exist in a vacuum.
Right.
And the very fact that it is there and what is included in it also kind of feeds in and falls within the ambit of the legal framework in this country. So we have a law since 1995 when the Penal Code was amended, which actually brought in sexual harassment as an offence into the criminal law of this country, and that is quite broad in nature, again, like Jayanthi mentioned, and everything that she mentioned that is in the Safe Sports policy is included within that. It's not a long definition. It gives you kind of room to move inside it, and I think you mentioned about ogling and things like that, which is conduct of a non-verbal nature, which is also covered in the sexual harassment clause of the Penal Code.
Sure.
So you have that sort of framework of the legal, in the law. I think when you talk about law enforcement, I think that is where the problem occurs. And like any other form or any other criminal offense which involves sexual violence, the problem is in the implementation. So I think it's also important to realize that we have a Safe Sports policy, we have certain, and we will go into that, but there's also always the option of going to the police and making a complaint.
Sure.
And from there on, there will be the usual system, the process that follows under the general law of the land. So I think that is important to keep in mind as well. But we have an extensive legal framework stemming also from the Constitution. The fact that Article 12 of our Constitution talks about equality before the law, and like Niloo also mentioned, the fact that even the Penal Code provision on sexual harassment says any person. So it's not gender specific. It talks about any person. So we are including all genders in that particular provision. So there is room for interpretation under the law as well.
All right, fantastic.
So now just to add to Shyamala's points, the Safe Sports policy is not only for athletes, it covers all stakeholders of sports in the country, right? You could be a coach, you could be a manager, you could be an administrator of sports. So this policy covers all stakeholders, not only limited to the athletes. So that is what is great, because the whistleblowing can be from even a spectator. It could be a person, not necessarily the person who is the victim. It could be a person who is observing from in the whole environment, that they can come and whistleblow on the Safe Sports policy.
The policy clearly says that the National Olympic Committee of Sri Lanka shall have a zero tolerance policy of sexual harassment and abuse. Niloo, my question to you is, why has it been so difficult for Sri Lanka to mainstream anti-harassment in sport? Because it keeps happening, and women especially, female athletes especially, but not limited to female athletes, suffer in silence as opposed to complaining.
I would put it to two words: lack of education, lack of awareness. our athletes and our stakeholders of sports in the country must realize this is a very important topic for us to develop as a nation in terms of developing sports culture, sports athletes to represent the country. You cannot have an environment that doesn't have a safe zone for these athletes to compete and show their highest performance in whatever games, whether it's in school level or whether it's national level or international, whether it's the Olympics you represent. You have to create that safe zone for them to compete at the highest performance level. So that is where National Olympic Committee, taking the lessons learned from International Olympic movement and the Olympics, that they want to create this. Because in any international game now, there is a safe sports officer that is designated, right? They are taking it very seriously in terms of the international, whether it's Asian Games or Olympics, they are taking it very seriously on this matter, because they want the athletes to feel comfortable and not to suffer in silence. Because sometimes if you don't have a policy, then they don't have an outlet to go and complain or even bring it to notice, because there is no policy covering them. Then they are open to whatever.
Sure. Jayanthi, if we speak about the reality behind abuse, harassment, we see economic disempowerment from the one hand, we see vulnerability, we see unequal power dynamics at play, pressures, societal pressures, parental pressures to perform at sports. So how does one go about managing and surviving and thriving in sport in Sri Lanka, notwithstanding all these realities?
Challenging one. I mean, I think as Niloo said, that's where education is so critical. And I'm also talking about education even for preschool children, right? Because at that level, we need to talk about good touch, bad touch. I mean, this is only in sports, this policy, but it's also linked to a broader notion of just abuse, and we know the number of statutory rapes that happen on a daily basis in the country, and also the percentage of convictions, you know. Yeah. So in terms of, because of all these societal pressures and the norms, the patriarchal norms that are there in society, women and girls particularly are taught to stay silent. But that is something that we need to change, that attitude and that kind of norm that has to be changed, where anyone, women, men, trans people, anyone who faces harassment should be encouraged to talk about it within a safe space though. But what happens also in some cases, unfortunately, when they do speak about it, nobody believes them, or they are chucked out. And then of course the perpetrators, so there's also this culture of impunity, which pervades throughout the country, of course, but that happens particularly within sports as well. So how do we hold perpetrators or alleged perpetrators accountable, you know, conduct an inquiry in an impartial manner? That is important. So I think it's a huge step that there is a safe sports policy, and I think there's a lot more work to be done in terms of ensuring that people who do experience harassment and abuse within this sector of sports, and anyone, including athletes, but everyone else included, can speak out about it, and that something will be done about the complaint, you know. So only over time that we need to build the trust that actually actions will be taken when there is some abuse or harassment that has happened, so that we can change the culture. You know, the idea is not to stay silent, and if you do complain, that your complaint will be taken seriously, and that there will be repercussions.
Shyamala, when we speak about power dynamics, unequal power dynamics, let's talk a bit about the Anti-Corruption Act, which was recently introduced. It has a provision on sexual bribery, which includes sports bodies. Take us through this.
Yeah, so this is an interesting development actually in the law, and the point being that sexual forms of bribery are now included as a form of corruption in this country, and this is something that my organization has also actually worked tirelessly for over the last 7 years to try and bring in this aspect of sexual forms of gratification to be a form of bribery and corruption. I think going back to the law itself, and one very laudable section which I found subsequently was the fact that Section 108 of the anti-corruption law actually brings in sports events and sports bodies under the ambit of the law. So this is a very interesting sort of development, also because the anti-corruption law brings in the private sector. So you have this whole, initially in this country we had a bribery act which only covered public officials. But with the new law which came out in 2023 June, the private sector and sports bodies are also included. And the wording in that basically says that if you talk about sexual bribery, okay, I think I should explain a little bit about what sexual bribery means. Yes. Usually in a case of harassment, it's kind of a one-way offense, right? Somebody is harassing someone. But in a sexual bribery offense, there needs to be 3 elements. Okay. One would be, you give me something, I will give you something back. So this quid pro quo element, which is very pertinent under the sports, under the ambit of sports as well, I would think, right? You give me something, I will give you something back. The other is the abuse of authority, and the fact that here you're talking about one person exercising his or her authority because of the power, again, the power dynamic coming in here, who has the power to do something to the detriment of the person, to the detriment of the victim. So that's one aspect of it. And the other is coercion. So you need to have this implied or express coercion, right? So those 3 elements need to be there for it to be a form of sexual bribery. And what the law says is that sexual favors also amount to a form of gratification. So for example, if a person offers a bribe, that person, now under the current law, this is very interesting, under the current law, even the person who is giving into the bribe, so in this instance a sexual bribe, would also be committing an offense, right? And I personally don't agree with that, because if you're talking about a sexual bribe, there is no way you can compare that to a monetary bribe, right? The reason being that sexual forms of bribes, you're kind of attacking the vulnerability of the person in front of you, right? And because of the power dynamic, the vulnerability is attacked, and the victim gives in or offers the bribe because where she has had no other recourse, right? So that is one where you offer the bribe. There's also soliciting a bribe. So you can ask and say, look, if you do this, if you give me this, I will make sure that you win, right? That can come in as well, right? So, and then accepting the bribe. The person, the one who offers, and then there's obviously acceptance. So the acceptor is also guilty. So you have this situation where, especially in sports, I would think that this would come in here, right? The fact that all of these 3 elements and need to be present for it to be a sexual type of bribe, and it can be ever present in the sports field as well.
Jayanthi, I'd like your perspectives on harassment vis-a-vis the intersectionalities in our identities.
Okay, so that's an important question because when we talk about intersecting identities, when you talk about intersectionality, it basically means that all of us, I mean, we're all women, but we also have different multiple identities we all carry, right? So in my case, I would say I'm belonging to a middle class, I'm a Sinhala burger woman, that's one identity. Well, 3 identities there.
Sure.
But I think depending on the different identities or where we come from, whether we're from the north, the east, the south, from an urban center like Colombo, the kind of harassment and abuse we can face could be different.
Right.
So if I'm a Tamil-speaking woman and I go to a police station in Mathura, for example, and there's nobody who speaks my language, there's a further additional level of abuse and harassment that I can face because I'm not able to communicate in my language. So with the harassment, when we talk about harassment and abuse, it's important to also acknowledge and recognize these intersecting identities because there is no one size fits all. We can't say, oh, you're all women, therefore it's just this.
Yeah.
So it also always is depending on the case, on a case by case basis, to sort of understand how does that harassment occur, how does it happen, because of the power dynamics also. Right? If I'm from an ethnic minority, for example, then the power dynamics are way more compared to if I'm from a ethnic majority group, right? Which I am, as a Sinhalese, let's say. The harassment I face would be different, would be less in certain circumstances.
Niloo, if we take a look at the safe sport policy, speak to us about how aware associations and federations, the sport bodies in Sri Lanka are, and how afraid are they of it? How compliant are they of it?
So when we introduced the safe sports policy, we carried out education series for all the national federations coming under the National Olympic Committee Sri Lanka. There are 35 sports that come under. They have to sign saying they accept it. In terms, the federation has to sign accepting the safe sports policy. However, just signing and accepting is not convincing, because these people have to live it, they have to understand it, and they have to pass the message to the athletes coming under those federations. I don't think that's happening. Right. Because it's very limited. We even call them for education series, participation is very low, and it's not, like I said earlier, it's not limited to athletes. So there is a huge spectrum of people that we need to cover in terms of this policy education, and it's a hard task. So one of the things I believe that we should as a country be doing is that these things should be brought in the education curriculum from school level. You cannot bring respect for females, gender equality, all that at the time that you become an elite athlete. It has to come from the preschool level. To respect each other, whichever gender, that has to flow in the education system.
Niloo, you're functioning as the chairperson of the Gender Equity Committee of the National Olympic Committee. Have you had conversations with the Minister of Sports, for example, about the importance of mainstreaming this policy, or with other stakeholders? If so, talk us through it.
Yes, we have. And I must say, people are receptive to it and they understand the importance of this policy that has been brought in, but unfortunately it came during COVID time, so we were limited in terms of education. But I think going forward we have a lot of plans to take this policy to national federations and educate them on the importance of following the policy. And in that, one of the main key area is to have a safeguard mechanism, how to bring to light any kind of victimization or harassment that athlete or anybody, any stakeholder in sports, this thing. So I think maybe Jayanthi can explain the process that has been set up for it, no?
Fantastic. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform. Shakti Crowd.
Every Saturday and Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Tune in to Shakti TV.
මගෙන් කන්න පින තියෙන කවුරුම හරි ගෑණියෙක් බලලා කසාද බඳින්න මං තීරණය කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වෙනුවෙන් මං හදපු ලිස්ට් එකට තමුන්ලගේ නම් දෙකක් ඇතුළත් කළා.
මෙතන පිස්සුනට යන්න එපා හේමලයි. හදන්න මිට යන්නේ මම නැති කරන්නද?
ආදරේ තරම් අද රාත්‍රියට ඉදිහට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන් T20 ලෝක කුසලාන ක්‍රිකට් සැනකෙළිය කිරුළ සොයා යන සිංහයින්ගේ මූලික වටයේ අභියෝග 4 ජුනි 3 වෙනිදා දකුණු අප්‍රිකාව ජුනි 8 වෙනිදා බංග්ලාදේශය ජුනි 12 වෙනිදා නේපාලය ජුනි 17 වෙනිදා නෙදර්ලන්තය සිරස TV ඔස්සේ සහ www.sirasatv.lk වෙබ් අඩවිය ඔස්සේ සජීවීව
මිලියන 20ක හාට් එකේ බීට් එක ක්‍රිකට්
සිම්පත හරියට ලියාපදිංචි කරගෙන තියෙන්න ඕන. සමහරවිම දන්නෙත් නැහැනේ.
මේ සිම්පත කොයි තරම් වැදගත්ද කියලා මේ දුරකථන පාවිච්චි කරන හැම දෙනාම දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා තමයි මම කියන්නේ.
මැයි වලින් පස්සේ ලොකු ගංවතුර තත්ත්වයක් එන්න නියමිතයි කියලා. කාලගුණ විද්‍යාඥයින් අනතුරු අංගවන පසුබිමක ඔබ කොයි විදිහටද මේ අපේ තෙත්බිම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් දකින්නේ?
කොළඹ නගරයේ තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් 21%ක් තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් වැසි ජලයෙන් 39%ක් රඳවා ගන්න බව.
දැන් විලත් නගරයේ අපි කටයුතු කරන කට්ටිය දැන් එනවා පරිපාලනය නගරයට. ඔතන මේ දන්නවා හැටි අපි ගත්තොත් අලවටුගොඩ එහෙම නැත්නම් කිඹුලවල ප්‍රදේශයේ අපිට තියෙනවා රැයට කෑම කඩ. ඉස්සර එක තිබ්බ කොහෙද? කොළඹ. දැන් ගොඩ දෙනෙක් මේ පැත්තට එන්න පටන් ගන්න. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ට අර පොළ පාට ගතිය. මේ තියෙන බ්‍රීස් එක කියන්නේ එඟට දැනෙන වෙනස අනිවාර්යෙන් දැනෙනවා.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. We're discussing a heavy topic tonight, safety in sports. I have a fantastic panel of guests, Shyamala Gomez, Jayanthi Kuru Utumpala and Niloo Jayathilake joining me on tonight's discussion. I have a general question to the three of you. When we talk about an individual who has gone through harassment or abuse, what must they first do? What is the grievance mechanism? Where does the complaint go to? Jayanthi, if you could start.
Yes. The National Olympic Committee of Sri Lanka has a website, and on the website there is a link where you could, if you just search for safe sports policy, there is a complaints mechanism that you can use, which is a Google form essentially, in Sinhala, English and Tamil. So you can fill up your complaint in whichever language you prefer. And that form will basically ask you what has happened, a little bit about when it happened, who was the alleged perpetrator, and it also does ask for your contact information, a name and your number. When that form is lodged in, what happens is it goes directly to what's known as a complaints committee, which is a committee that both Shyamala and I sit on.
Right.
So it's an independent committee that was set up by the National Olympic Committee, comprising of, there are about 8 of us in this pool, all of us having a background in gender, human rights, women's rights. And our role, the most important thing is that we're independent. We're not attached or paid for by the NOC.
Sure.
But when the complaint comes, is lodged in the system, the chairperson of this committee, of our committee, will get a notification that there is a complaint.
Right.
And then the first thing we would do is to review that complaint, to try and get an appointment with the person who has lodged the complaint, talk to them, have an appointment, have a meeting with them, get more information, just to sort of find out what has happened, get more details, and at the same time ask them to give us names and contact people of any witnesses who might corroborate their evidence and their story, and also about who the alleged perpetrator is.
Right.
So everything with the consent, with written consent. And once all the information, then we would meet with the witnesses as well, at least up to 3 witnesses, and we would meet with the alleged perpetrator. And based on the case, I mean, in some cases, there have been cases where we have felt it's more a police matter, so we have directed it directly to the police,
Right.
for that to be picked up accordingly. But in cases where we can conduct an inquiry, talk to all parties, and find out if it has to go to another level. So there's 3 levels. The complaints committee is at the first level where we review it. Then it goes into a hearing committee, depending on what we do with the review. At the hearing committee, there are representatives from the National Olympic Committee, from the Sports Ministry, from the federation. I mean, if it's, for example, a certain federation, the alleged perpetrator is from a certain federation, a representative from that federation will also sit on that committee. And there's a gender representation in the committee. I think it's about 50% would be women in that committee as well. And then various steps would be taken depending on what that committee decides. So basically the process is set up in such a way that when a complaint is received, there is an independent inquiry into it, and then we would feed back to the complainant also to let them know what the process is. So at the moment, that's where we are at.
Is there room for anonymous complaints?
Yes. Well, someone else can complain on behalf of another person, especially if it's a person with physical or intellectual disabilities. That is also allowed. Anonymous, the only issue is that actually, no, we did have a complaint as well, which somebody else made the complaint. We did get contact information about the person who experienced the harassment. Unfortunately, that person did not give us consent to continue the case because they were quite worried about what the repercussions. And so in that case, because we did not have the consent to proceed, we could not follow on. Right?
Which is my next question, Shyamala. Are victims of harassment risking their careers by complaining? Aren't they going to be fearful of being penalized? It's a huge risk to take. Isn't it easier in their minds? They probably think, isn't it easier to just suck it up?
I think you need to again look at this within the broader framework of other arenas as well. For example, the workforce. So you would, if you draw parallels, you know that there are two similar things may occur where there is sexual harassment and there is fear of making a complaint and then facing the repercussions. Maybe stigma, ostracization, it might be, everyone looking at you thinking you're the person who actually instigated this violence against you. So the same thing would occur in the sports arena as well. But I think the point here is that there needs to be confidence among the victim or the person who is reporting the incident that the incident will be taken seriously, and also all confidentiality will be kept in place.
Right.
I think that is the most critical part. Sure. I have sat on a few other committees in the private sector as well, where, for example, when you hold an inquiry, you need to be holding it in a neutral space, where nobody would say, oh, she is the one who got harassed, and everyone knows who that person is. So I think, these are things that we need to make sure that we need to ensure and make sure that there is confidentiality, and that would be something I think that would be very important.
Right. Sure. Niloo, it's so important to create a safe space for women in sport, for young girls to emerge in sport. How can we better ensure that our legal frameworks ensure this protection mechanism?
So this is what sports in Sri Lanka need to address, where if you don't have such policies and safe zones being created, you will not see the little girls coming from different to take up sports, because their parents, they have inhibition saying, okay, is my daughter safe when they come for sports practices, or is my son safe? Are they being looked after? Are they, what kind of environment are they playing the sport? So those kind of thoughts inhibit the parents from sending their kids for sports in the country. So, but when you have such legal system and the policies or the environment being created, then the confidence of these parents will be more, and there will be more children taking up sports. So that is one of the critical factors in terms of promoting sports in the country. We need these as tools to safeguard the athletes. So it's a norm. Now in the West, it's becoming very normalized to talk about such subjects. They are making it very open. I mean, I must say the learnings even from the US to all these athletes are the role models of society, right? Even in Sri Lanka, if we see, we know every single cricketer's name. We know who, who Jayanthi is, right, who's seated next to me. We know who our Olympic gold medalist, Susantika Jayasinghe. I mean, these are household names. The athletes are role models of society. So when they start talking and saying, we are not going to accept this, right, unless, these things, so then it will flow down to our grassroots level.
Absolutely.
So that's the confidence we give our people of this country to come, take up sports. So it's important that the administrators recognize this as a very key point to promote sports in the country. And I hope the ministry to other education ministry take on these things seriously and do a huge campaign in role modeling of our athletes accepting this policy. And just to say, we did a campaign in 2020 during COVID time. We said harassment is no game, right? And which is true.
If I may just come in, I think going back to that whole intersectionality aspect of it, I think, we talk about the safe sport policy, but we also need to realize and remember that the policy applies island-wide. And the intersectionalities come up when you think about, for example, the war impacted areas, if you think about the plantation communities. So you have these communities that are marginalized, and vulnerable. And obviously in those particular societies or communities, there are emerging sportswomen, there are emerging sports stars as well. And I think it's really important that, like the way Niloo said, the fact that we need to be, having education, curricula including these aspects into their sports, when they teach sports, for example. In school, you have a games period. What do they teach there? It's just only about, the physical aspect of it. What about these
Shyamala,
issues?
this is, I mean, this makes a lot of sense. This is not rocket science. Why isn't it still being done?
Yeah, good question. I think patriarchy and the resistance to change, I think.
And who's at the top also?
Yeah,
who's making the decisions?
Political will.
Yes.
Yeah, lack of
So to
political
add
will.
to that, ladies, I want to bring in promoting such ideas, we need gender equity or equality in terms of the national federations as well.
Right.
Because if you see any national federation is male dominated,
Of course.
right? You have very few females coming up in sports administration, right? So I speak for the females that they must come forward and face the elections, face this thing with the men and come into place of position. So that they can be the voice for the females.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add there that those females also need to be gender sensitive.
Yes.
Because sometimes
Right.
we
Like
assume,
internalized misogyny.
we assume that the women are also sensitive. Sometimes we may be wrong there.
Sure.
And I think it's really, again, education comes up and awareness about these issues. So, if you have a sports policy, you need to be talking about it. You need to, like the way you said, Niloo, like if you're going to be asking women to come forward, they need to know why. And they need to know how they can behave when they actually go into those positions. So I think that's also important.
Yeah.
But regardless, though, I think it's important to have more women at decision-making levels.
Yes.
Because in the sports sector,
It's so exclusionary,
male-dominated.
right?
Yeah. It's almost like, women can't do sports. What's the point? I mean, we also say there are norms like that say, don't run like a girl, right? Don't fight like a girl. Don't cry like a girl. So all these norms also prevent women from actually participating fully in sports. And of course, then on top of that, the harassment that happens within that space keeps them, prevents them from really, so that enabling environment is what we need to create.
These cultural myths keep us from achieving our fullest potential. And it's the women who are disproportionately impacted by these.
Of course, yes.
How do we go about breaking these, breaking down these myths?
I mean, back to education again, but I would urge everyone, like men, women, everybody, to question these norms, right? Because the thing is, when we say don't run like a girl, and I have heard many people say this, it's about asking why not? Why can't I run like a girl, right? I always say I climbed Everest as a woman, as a girl, and made it to the top, right? So it's about questioning where does it come from, right? Why do people say women are weak? Look at the plantation community. How many kilos do they carry on a daily basis? 20 kilos at a minimum, right? The Malaya community. And we say women are weak. So that's where the questioning needs to happen. Why cannot a woman be a CEO? Of course they can. They can be anything they want. But there's a barrier in terms of preventing women from getting there, including various attitudes about women. That, oh, if she's a CEO, she's a bad mother, you know, because she's not a good wife, she's a bad mother, she's just at work all the time. But a CEO who's a man, fantastic, right? So these are the norms that really need to change. And I think it's just that society, they're norms created by society. And that's why it's not written in stone. So society means all of us. And if all of us can question them, you know, ask the questions, challenge them, we can create new norms that will enable everyone to reach our goals, and within the sports sector, to also be the best kind of athlete that we want to be.
Absolutely. So taking on from that, there are three key points that comes up in my mind. One is the media plays a huge role, right, in terms of bringing out female athletes. Now in our country, if you see, it would be like, you know, I don't think there's a balance in terms of media reporting. If a girls tournament happens in golf, they might not report the same way as a boys tournament. So same goes for cricket. I mean, until recently, women's cricket was nowhere reported in the front page, right? But now with the role models coming up and the importance, you can see the media balance coming in the sport. Similarly, in terms of sponsors, sponsors also must recognize that if they put 10 million down for a cricket tournament, they should be putting 10 million down for a women's cricket tournament, because they always say, oh no, women's tournament, let us just give 2 million, you know. So the sponsors also play a huge role in developing this culture in Sri Lanka, in society. So it's important that we need to keep talking. And leadership roles, females need to take a huge leadership role in these sports federations. If that doesn't happen, I mean, we are not going to move forward the way we want, or it will be a slow process.
Jayanthi and Shyamala, I'd like your perspectives on how we can, as a society, go about empowering victims and survivors of harassment to speak up and not remain in silence.
I'd like to just come in here to say that, I mean, I'd like to put the onus or the burden on the other side. I mean, yes, we need to make sure that the victim survivor is, you know, empowered to be able to complain. But on the other side, what is waiting for him or her on the other side? In terms of when you make the complaint, what are the support systems that are available? So I think we need to make sure that those are there, right? Whether there's an empathetic police officer who's taking on your complaint correctly in the language that he or she is making the complaint in, for example. So the other side needs to be, you know, you need to ensure the other side as well. Otherwise, you're putting the burden, I believe, too much on the victim survivor, right? I mean, he or she needs to have confidence in a system which helps or supports him or her to be able to make that complaint, right? And to be confident that there will be that due process will follow as a result. If that doesn't happen, they're not going to complain, right? So I would like to put the onus on the other side, and I think the state here has a big role to play as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I would definitely echo Shyamala, because there's enough pressure already on victim survivors to just survive through that, right? But definitely, where is the accountability of holding the perpetrators accountable, right? We spoke about impunity earlier.
Yes.
So how do we really get rid of this system of pervasive system of impunity and actually ensure that perpetrators are held accountable and that there are sanctions and repercussions when you do abuse or cause sexual harassment, you know, or perpetrate a offense such as this? And that comes back again in terms of talking to a majority of the offences we do know are from men and boys towards women and girls. There are the other cases, but lots of the numbers. I mean, just look at only the rape statistics. That's enough to talk about the numbers, right? But how do we talk to men and boys about asking for consent, even in relationships, right? Or even, and knowing when to when to draw the line, or understanding what is harassment, and that I do not have a right to do that on any other human being. Yeah. So that aspect is also important, because I think we have been talking to girls and women for a long time, and people are speaking out. But the gap is that now even the ones who speak out, the repercussions are so strong and the examples are not really amazing. So then there's it's tougher to keep speaking out then, right?
I'd like to conclude this conversation on a hopeful note. So what are your closing remarks? How can we go about creating an ecosystem for sport where there is a culture of safety and dignity for all the stakeholders?
I think, again, I'd just like to go back to what Niloo mentioned in terms of the role of the media, and the fact that the media also has a role to play in educating the public, about patriarchal norms, about how this pervades the sports arena as well. I think these are things that we need to be looking at in terms of creating, that's the first step in creating an ecosystem that is supportive of sports persons.
All right, Jayanthi?
Also important to ensure that there is a system in place, that a confidential system in place, so that complaints can be taken seriously, and that repercussions are also there for issues where, for serious incidents in terms of sexual harassment, that if I do complain, I do have a safe space to make the complaint, and that there is also psychosocial support available, right, where I can find counseling if I need to go for counseling or therapy. So again, in terms of what kind of services are available for victim survivors, to ensure that that it doesn't disregard your complaint or make you feel worse about it, but that you have a space that supports you with that journey.
Niloo?
I think the main this thing would be the role modeling that would come from the athletes, and it would filter down to society in terms of not accepting what you don't feel comfortable with. So that message we can send in a faster and a more concentrated way to general society, that sexual harassment or abuse is not acceptable for any gender, male or female.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, ladies. Niloo, Jayathilake, Jayanthi, Kuru, Utumpala and Shyamala Gomez. Thank you for sharing your expertise and perspectives. A special thank you also to Carol Tozer for caring enough to advocate for the right causes. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Good night.
TV1. TV for life.
Election interference is an authoritarian move to undermine democracy. Lawyers Collective Sri Lanka issues statement. Presidential election must be held before the 17th of October, UNP Chairman Vajira Abewardhana says. What did Sarath Fonseca discuss with the President? Red light from SLPP to the President. Court of Appeal reverses decision to release 48 elephants to a group including Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Order for legal action to be instituted against those who had elephants in their possession.
TV1. TV for life.
This moment is all that I've been dreaming of. Well, focus. Somewhere I feel it in my soul. One chance is everything we've waited for. It's our time, so let me take it home and knock it out of this world.
a chance so we can be great kings. No time now wasting, no more debating. Today, our future creating. Here when me stating, we want the rating. Open a pray, enough deliberating. No plating, it been frustrating. So we see the better in our life we making. Because life is giving and taking. Unity enough collaborating. You see the boundaries that we breaking. When we should have been celebrating.
This moment is all that I've been dreaming of.
And this world,
somewhere I feel it in my soul.
Champion thing.
One chance is everything we've waited for.
No,
it's our time, so let me take it home and knock it out of this world.